Hi, everybody, and welcome to another chapter of Ask a Witch. I'm Katrina Rasbold, professional witch of, been a witch for about 40 years now. So, by professional witch, I mean that part of what I do is I teach and do spell work for and readings for clients and other people on their behalf. So, I get asked a lot of questions with what I do, especially with the books that I've had published, with people contacting me through publishers and that sort of thing to ask questions and just emails in general. And so part of this series is just to throw those questions out there because if they're wondering it, other people might be wondering it too. And this is just my take on it. I want to be very specific to say that when I answer questions in this context, it's specifically about what I've experienced, what I do in my practice. I can't speak to the experience and the spiritual practices that other people have. This is what I do and what I've seen done and shared with friends of mine, that sort of thing. So the question we're going to talk about today came up actually at Thanksgiving dinner. It was my daughter-in-law that asked me, and she said, how do I get a patron god or goddess? How do I know if this is my patron god or my patron goddess? And I want to be very clear that when we're talking about witchcraft, the ceremonial part of craft, where we're doing rituals and rites and this sort of thing, is a very tiny part of witchcraft. Witchcraft on the whole is very catch as you can, do spell work as you need to without casting circles, calling quarters, that sort of thing. That is specifically a Wiccan thing or a Druid thing or an OTO thing, or it is about the ceremonial practice of magic, which may not be included in actual other people's actual practice of witchcraft. So I know this doesn't apply to everybody, but it's still a question I was asked. And since I was a Wiccan for a lot of years, I feel qualified to speak to it. And also since I've had a number of patron gods and goddesses, not everybody has them. There's a lot of people who practice witchcraft or hoodoo who are Christians and subscribe to the Christian God theology. But this is specific to having probably a pantheon of gods and goddesses that you're working with, or specific ideology of there are gods and there are goddesses in a polytheistic way. So I'm going to say what I said to my daughter-in-law, and then maybe in the comments we can have further discussion about that. So this has just been my experience. Now, I have had, as I said, several patron goddesses. I really don't know that I've ever had a patron god. I have a very um, sort of broad image of what the god energy feels like to me, but I tend to look at it almost as an animus kind of projection of masculinity. For the goddess figure, however, I've had some very specific energies associated with that and have worked hand in hand, heart to heart, spirit to spirit with some pretty strong goddesses. So, goddesses like Hecate, like Bridget for a long time, I worked with. Another one that I'll tell you about in a minute called Nantosuelta. So I've worked with very specific goddesses, and the way that I connected to them or attached onto them was different in the two different ways that I became attached to a patron goddess. And I really think that both are equally vital and equally what's my word? Correct or valid. Valid was the word I was doing, V word. Valid. So I'm going to address both of them because either one of them might be a way that you connect with a god or goddess of your soul connection. So ideally, when we are connecting with a god or goddess, it's going to be a god or goddess associated with your genetic history or your homeland or whatever you would call it. That's usually what's going to happen. I am walking experience that is not always what happens. And I'll tell that story in a minute too. The way that I connected with my goddesses that were of Celtic pantheon, which is my background and my genetic makeup, I always figured that if I had a patron goddess, it was going to be a Celt goddess. And so when I became Wiccan, which was my first avenue into witchcraft, I started really investigating who the different goddesses were because I felt I had to have one. Who was I going to relate to? And because I was raised Christian, this idea of having a goddess was really exciting to me. It was something new. It was something that really spoke to my heart that, of course, in nature, there is male and female. So, of course, our gods would be male and female. So I started really looking into it and I was just drawn to Bridget. I thought she was just amazing. The idea that she was a smithy and that she was just an absolute badass just really appealed to me. And so I said, I pick her. I'm going to study her. So I started doing altars to her. I started really calling her into my circles when I would practice and spending a lot of time with her. And one of the things I missed that was really interesting that I didn't find out about her for about a year of working with her is that she's considered to be the goddess of childbirth. And at the time, I was a childbirth instructor. I had 3 children of my own, and I taught Lamaze classes. I taught natural childbirth classes. And so that was yet another attachment that really connected me with her. And so I worked with Bridget for a very long time and we didn't break up or anything like that. I started to come into contact with Hecate and really liked that crone at the crossroads kind of feel. So I started working with her and enjoyed that. But I did exactly the same thing. I began to research, I began to I guess basically have an audience with her and talk to her, and she kind of swept me in as her own. But admittedly, in both of those, I pursued those goddesses. I said, I choose you. I like what I see about you. Now, of course, being goddesses, that it was my choice might just be an illusion. It might just be, well, nope, you did that because that's what you were supposed to do at that moment. But I enjoyed it, and I felt like in that moment that it was something that I chose and pursued. So then we get into the callings that came a little bit later, maybe 20 years after all of this. My husband at that time, well, geez, he's still my husband, but it was a different time than when I worked with Bridget. I had a different husband then. But my current husband, Eric, and we were not married for very long, and we were having some real financial crisis. And I was concerned about my hearth and home. And I knew that I wanted to connect with a goddess that would really um, protect that hearth and home and in a more aggressive way than I thought maybe Vesta or Hera would, or some of the other hearth and home goddesses. And so I just prayed and I said, I need somebody to come to me who is the one that I need. And all of a sudden, everywhere I went, there were crows. I mean, I was just inundated with crows. Crows followed me in my car, landed on my windowsill, pecked at the window, were all flocking all over my yard. I'm like, what is with all these crows? So I literally Googled at that time. This was around probably, I'm going to guess 2000, 1999, something like that. And I literally Googled Celtic goddess associated with crows. And that's when this Nantusuelta goddess came up. And sure, she was just a badass protector of the home. So I made a little altar to her with little crows and a little house and offered her offerings. And we got out of our difficult situation. So I was very grateful for her, but she didn't follow me. She stayed with that situation after that was resolved. I felt her just kind of fade away, but that was one where I asked a goddess to come to me, and she did. So fast forward many years, and I was actually called not necessarily by a goddess, but by a folk saint that I did not expect at all. And that was when I started working with Santa Marte, the saint of death. And I became a devotee of hers back around 2013, I think it was 2014, maybe. And I didn't expect it because I am not Mexican. I didn't expect any immersion into Mexican theology at all. And boy, I want to tell you, there's stories, but she came for me. She was like, "You're mine. You're gonna work with me." And so I did, and it's been very gratifying. So it's been almost 10 years now, and I just have a really strong connection with her. But yeah, that was just a very strong calling of, no, I'm going to put myself in your path until you pay attention to me. I'm going to be everywhere until you pay attention to me and hear what I have to tell you. And so we've had a really good working relationship ever since. So what I'm going to say based on all of that is there are two ways to find or become attached to your patron god or goddess. The first one is that you make an overture. You study, starting with the pantheons associated with your genetic makeup, and say, okay, who's there? Who calls to me? You can even open a god and goddess book and put your finger down and say, that's the one I'm supposed to have. But just see who calls you, see what resonates with you, and start to study them. Find out what they like, what offerings do they want, what flowers do they like, what scents do they like, what are they all about, who are they represented as in mythology, and see if it's something that fits into your life. Now, another thing you can do is to get one of the goddess decks. There are a lot of goddess oracle decks out there that you can get, and just shuffle it up, draw one, and see who comes to you. They don't have as many that are associated with the gods, but there are lots for the goddesses. And just see who comes and study them. We used to have a group a long time ago called the Hut, and this was all an all-female group, and we called it the Hut because it was about the hut that was the red tent where everybody went when they were having their menses and were being themselves and being primal and very authentic. And we wanted to duplicate that. And one of the things that we did with the Hut is everybody drew a goddess card every month at the full moon, and they studied it for that month. And when they came back, they gave a report on that goddess and said, this is who she is, this is where she comes from, this is what she's about, this is what you appeal to her for, this is why she came into my life. And then we would draw another card. And I tell you what, sometimes people do the same cards for 5 or 6 months in a row because that goddess was just focused on whatever lesson they were taking to them. So that's the first one, is you find them, you look for them. The other is sometimes you just get inundated. All of a sudden you're dreaming about a particular goddess. You're finding statues of her everywhere you go, or god everywhere you go. Accidentally you come upon YouTube videos or books that are about that particular god or goddess, and that's when the goddess is pursuing you or the god is pursuing you. And so that could be another way. So you either pursue them or they pursue you. And sometimes you'll pursue a god or goddess and they reject you. They're like, nope, this isn't our time, you just think I'm cool. And when that happens, all of a sudden your candles to them are not burning. You get interrupted during your ceremonies with them. The main way to find out if a god or goddess works for you is to hold space with them. Just spend time with them, pray, connect with them, and see if it feels right. See if you feel comfortable with them and they feel comfortable with you. It's almost like getting to know somebody for a date. Just spend that time and just see if it's a good fit. So that's what I've got to say about patron gods and goddesses. And you know what? You don't have to have one. Don't feel ever forced to pick one. Now, sometimes you'll be working with a group and they have their gods and goddesses that they specifically follow, and then you would act in accordance with that. But you don't have to have one. You can just pray to all that is male, all that is female. You can connect with, we used to work with the anima and the animus, the male and the female, that energy. It's really about the energy and then subdividing into different kinds of personalities and gods and goddesses. So just kind of see how that works for you. And I look forward to your comments about patron gods and goddesses and what experiences you've had with being called by a god or goddess or pursuing a god or goddess to see if they're right for you. Thanks for tuning in for Ask a Witch. Y'all take care.